Welcome to Community of Writers. I'm Reed Dixon, and today we will hear Josie Milliken read one of her short stories and have a brief craft talk about her influences and her approach to writing prose. Thank you for making time to be with us today, Josie.
Thank you for having me.
So Josie Milliken's stories and essays and poems have been in a variety of literary magazines that include the Antioch Review, Mid-American Review, Cutbank, Sonora Review, New Orleans Review, and Third Coast. She has written 2 novels and lives here in Tucson, where she teaches writing and yoga right here at Pima Community College. So Josie, you're the first fiction writer on a program that has previously been called Community of Poets.
Yes.
It's kind of a funny thing. Anthony Sovak was excited about the prospect of bringing you onto the show, given that so many of us write across genre, and especially given that your writing in particular brings poetry into the prose, at least for the piece that we're reading today. I was first drawn into your work when I heard 2 pieces read at the recent speaker series here at Pima Community College in February, and today we get to hear one of those pieces and do a brief craft talk. Would you like to say a few words about the piece, or do you want to go ahead and just get started with the piece?
I'll just begin.
Okay, great.
The title of this piece is called Abraxas. I balance on the soft wood railing as he takes the plastic cup out of my hand, tosses it away, and holds his hands, palms down, in front of me. He has long, curly brown hair and a lanky sort of posture that curves toward me like parentheses around a thought. Play me, he says. I put my hands under his, palms up. Slap, I get him. Slap, again and again. He moves faster, tries pulling his hands away in time, but years of sitting on my father's lap have made me good at this game. You're not doing so well, I say, flipping my palms down. Let's try this way. Okay, he says, but instead of flipping his hands around, he grabs my wrists from underneath. Enough violence, he says. Too much in this world already. We walk minutes, maybe miles, along a trail to his apartment, which smells of neg champa and is filled with posters of fluorescent fractals and kaleidoscopes and whirling swirls of melting shapes and lines. He puts on music, Santana, Miles Davis, Hancock, Hendrix, and turns on black lights. The posters glow, and when he smiles, his eyes and teeth are yellow-green. He hands me fluorescent chalk, and we draw suns and moons and planets on legs, arms, sides, the spaces behind our ears, hidden places on our necks. By the time we fall asleep against plaid flannel, the sky is pinkening into day, and swirls of greens, purples, oranges, and reds cover us like skin. Years later, I am with coworkers for happy hour, listening as talk evolves from meetings and policies and curriculum emails to hurricanes, healthcare, harassment, to debt, guns, privacy, tax reform, Russia, the flu, to learning outcomes, to life outcomes, to just outcomes. So many outcomes, rigorous mountains of outcomes, so difficult to surmount. And what about incomes, someone says? Never any talk about incomes. Everything always out and never in. In is more important. What is out must get in, even if in is out. I'm lost, I say. Yes, someone says, lost, that is it. We all are lost too, in need of an interface, a world-scale outcomes management platform for Russia, the flu, taxes, healthcare, inequality, emails, hurricanes, fires, debt. I noticed the lights of an air hockey game turning white surfaces sheer glowing purple and feel the sharp, sweet pang of fluorescent chalk digging into my shoulders and back, glowing like lava on my arms. It's bad, someone says. Yes, someone adds, but in our own small worlds, there is good. A few moments pass by then, quiet as silence, sheer as shadow, thick as air. And then there is a phone being checked, and we all check phones and touch screens and straighten shirts and mention partners and children and pets. And here we sit straighter now with our important elements of important lives, saying, what's the quickest way to Speedway? Where are you parked? Life blurs away, blending and shifting to traffic and light and possibility and motion. I stay behind, lost still, stuck in a morning years ago. I am standing in a shower, adjusting the flow to a small, cool quiet. I check my arms, my chest, the curve of my stomach, the soft stretch of my thighs. I notice how, even though the swirling fluorescent streaks look different in daylight, when I shut my eyes, they glow. I hold a bar of soap, wash slowly around the colors, trusting that if I'm careful enough, they'll sink in, they'll stay.
Thank you, Josie.
You're welcome.
So your style of writing is one that pulls me in quite strongly. I hear the poetry in it, and I wonder, in terms of your influences and what brought you to writing in the first place, would be it a fiction writer or poet or any kind of writer, who were some writers or pieces that pulled you in or were a turning point for you in some way?
I would pinpoint one turning point being The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. Like many American teenagers, I was required to read it in high school, and the novel profoundly impacted me.
Mm-hmm.
The language, the layers, the way that language has the capacity to express meaning beyond the literal level. Mm-hmm. I'd never really seen or felt that before to such an extent, and then from there, I just was drawn to works of literature that embrace that same concept, mm-hmm. that have this shift in emphasis toward language and the figurative possibilities of expression through language and the power of language when used in creative, fluid, imaginative ways.
So you're talking about language. And I'm thinking, a lot of times when fiction is taught, we emphasize or talk about conflict, plot, character, as opposed to thinking about the way that language informs our work and drives the narrative forward. When you're looking at a piece of your writing, what are you looking for as you revise it? It comes out in many forms, I'm sure, but I'm just curious, does your personal poetics, I know you also write prose poetry, does your personal poetics or your poetic aesthetics impact how you revise your work or how you write in the first place?
Absolutely. I look for spontaneity and improv. I don't approach a work with any preconceived blueprint or outline. Many writers I know love to do that, and they need to do that. They like to have things planned out. And for me personally, what works is to begin with a moment, a scent, a sensory detail, a memory that sparks or inspires something,
Sure.
and then just begin expressing that on the page and being open to where that takes me.
Absolutely. As I heard your story again, it felt familiar in the sense that this is how we experience what seem to be the idle moments in life, that's part of our lives too, and trying to
Right.
describe what's happening up in our head, our interiority, is very, I think, difficult to do with traditional plot structures. How would you say that, this piece for me is about being lost, it's about memory, it's about time, it's about love. How does poetry help you capture what's upstairs or what's in the head of the narrator in the story?
Well, I think that concept of language-driven prose, language-driven writing is one that naturally relates to interiority.
Mm-hmm.
I think that it also relates to structure, and that when you have a looser, more spontaneous, free approach with the language, that automatically sort of influences the form and structure
Mm-hmm.
of the work.
I find that when I'm reading a piece, it kind of signals to me what to expect as a reader. And sometimes the writing itself, I know, I think I mentioned this before, the writer Yvonne Vera was a Zimbabwean. She is deceased, but her poetic style and the way she begins leads me towards a certain kind of reading that's different than I might expect from page-turner fiction that has these sort of familiar pieces that some writers want to anticipate with everything that they read, or some readers do. If you could think about structures in general or shape and how you approach, is there any particular kinds of shapes that you like to see in your own writing? Or
I'd say organic.
okay.
And that element of structure that you were referring to, like writers like Henry James and Jane Austen, you feel a very tightly controlled structure and plot there, and that resonates to very structured writing, right?
Sure.
The writing feels very careful and precise, and I find that there's a similar connection with looser writing, looser prose with a looser structure. And so for me, what I tend to find is that I used to play with Tinker Toys when I was little. The Tinker Toys, those little wood pieces that you insert little sticks into, and the structure would grow.
Sure.
And for myself, I would not approach that play with any preconceived idea of the structure I wanted. I would just start sticking the sticks into the blocks and hoping that something unified and cohesive would emerge.
Sure.
And so when I approach a writing task, it's a similar process where I don't know where I'm going. I kind of create little episodes or prose pieces, like those little blocks, and I'm hoping that at some point the connections between them emerge so that it stands cohesive on its own. And if it doesn't, I set it aside and maybe someday it'll get there, but if it does, you know, it's
I imagine sometimes when you reread it, you see patterns, or when you revisit the Lincoln logs or whatever they were, that you start
Tinker
to
Toys.
Tinker Toys, sorry. You start to see the patterns emerge, and you allow that to shape how you're working the piece. When you start off writing a new piece, maybe you could share, do you know if it's a story or a poem when you get started, or a creative nonfiction piece, or how do you know when you're getting started what it's going to be?
That's a great question, and often it's a blend of all of those. I don't feel we can always separate writing into categories like that.
Sure.
It'll have poetic elements, it will have obviously prose elements, and nonfiction elements and fiction elements. And so at the end, I think what is important to determine is how would I like my readers or an audience to read this? Because ultimately what a category is something that instructs readers how to read the piece.
Sure.
And is this a piece that should be read or wants to be read as true to life, nonfiction? Does it have that element? Is it true? Or as fiction or as poetry? And readers will approach it differently depending on what it's labeled as. So that's how I see those categories linking with work. But as for myself, those categories, I try to dissolve them as much as I can and then see what comes out of it at the end.
That's wonderful. As you're moving forward with a piece and you're approaching the idea of calling it done, what helps you know that a piece feels like it's done? It's a really difficult question.
The only way that I've ever found to determine that a piece I've written is done is if I feel excited about it. And that has happened very rarely. The piece I read today has shifted and changed for probably a decade.
Sure.
It's always undergoing some kind of revision. So calling a piece done is a very difficult thing to do, and I'm not sure it can ever really be accomplished.
Even after it's published? Do you sometimes feel like you wish you could change things after they're out in the world, or do you try to let go of them and be their own?
Both.
Okay.
Both.
Sure. In terms of projects that you're looking at for your future writing, does anything come to mind of things you want to work on?
I have several things. The most recent work that I wrote was a nonfiction essay. And so I found that I've been kind of returning to nonfiction as a form.
Great.
And from there, we'll see what happens next. I'd love to, a genre that I really love right now is flash fiction.
Sure.
And I think that our current culture is embracing flash fiction because it's shorter. We have this lower attention span kind of culture. And so having these pieces that are self-contained and satisfying and yet quite lovely and powerful is a very pleasing and comforting feeling in our world right now.
Yeah,
so
absolutely. Thank you, Josie, and thank you for joining us today for this segment of Community of Writers. For more information about the many creative writing courses available here at Pima Community College, please check our website at pima.edu or call 206-4500. See you next time.